welcome everybody to the Candid Climate Debate 2020, co-sponsored by Climate Justice Taranaki and Climate Change and Consciousness Taranaki. I'm one of your co-hosts, Annika Carlson, and we also have Ors Signa. Give a wave. Cool, we're the co-hosts. We're going to start with a karakia. So Ors, can you take us away?
Kia ora tātou, tēnā te mihi kia tātou. Kia tātou e noho ke raru I te maru, te maunga tito, ea tēnā te mei ki ngā waka o te maunga, ki ngā iwi o te maunga, tēnā te mei tēnā te tangi huarega whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, kia hia ki ana te ata kura he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Great, thank you, Ors. We're going to now go to Barbara for a little bit of housekeeping.
Yep, thanks, Annika. Just turn that phone off. So most of you are probably familiar with Zoom, but just go through a few of the controls in case you're not. If you're only seeing a tiny screen when you came in, there's a little box at the top right hand corner that if you click, then you should expand to your whole screen. In this format, the videos for the attendees are always off and the mics are muted unless the host asks you to speak. You'll see some controls at the bottom of your screen. What you can see, you should be able to see chat and a raise hand and a Q&A box. So we encourage you to put your name in the chat. And when you open the chat, you'll see you can have to all panelists or to all panelists and attendees. You want the bottom one, to all panelists and attendees. Oz has just put something in there. Kia ora everyone. So if you just put your name in, then you will find out who else is there as attendees. The Q&A is there for you to put a message in, a question in for the panelists. If you have something that you think hasn't been asked that you'd really like asked, you can use the Q&A box to put your question in, and everybody who's participating will get a chance to vote on that, and so that'll show how popular the questions are. That comes right at the end though, so we've got plenty of time to put those in. A poll will also come up at the end. You won't see that at the moment. Okay, so participants in general include the panelists who are the candidates and our hosts, and attendees who are the people who are listening. Yeah, if you accidentally put a question in the chat instead of in the Q&A, Stuart and I will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll copy it and put it into the question. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say. Is there anything I've missed?
Thanks, okay. Barbara. It's awesome. Cool. And I can see a whole bunch of people coming in. We've got 30 participants. So again, welcome people who have just logged on. We're going to have a really important conversation about climate change with our amazing candidates tonight. A little bit about how tonight is going to run. We're going to start with opening statements from each candidate. Now, candidates, 2 minutes, and we are strict. We've got Stuart, who is going to be keeping you all in line, and you don't want to mess with her. Then we're going to go and we're going to have 6 questions, between 5 or 6 questions, general questions, and that'll be a 2-minute answer from the candidates as well. Again, very strict. And then we'll open the floor. So that's where you can put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll go through some of them. We will have to keep a tab on the time, obviously, because we don't want to be here all night. So anyway, let me hand over to Ors to introduce the candidates.
Awesome, thank you, Annika. also stoked to be here for this hui. We have a great bunch of panelists here, the candidates for the New Plymouth seat. So thank you for joining us. From the Labour Party, we have Glenn Bennett. Kia ora, Glenn. We have Elliot Blythe, who's here as the Green Party representative. The Greens are not running a candidate, but Elliot's volunteering his time to speak for the Greens, if I'm understanding that correctly. We got Dan Thurston Crowe from the Opportunities Party.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Dan. We got Rusty Kane, who's running as an independent. Kia ora, Rusty. We've got Kath Lauderdale from Social Credit. Kia ora, Kath.
Kia ora.
And we got Vernon Tava just joining us a few seconds ago from the Sustainability Party. Kia ora, Vernon.
Hello.
And last but not least, we got Rowena Wood from the Advance Party. Kia ora, Rowena. Awesome. Also, I'd like to mention that we've got apologies from Jonathan Young from National and from Ada Zhao from the ACT Party. We also invited Murray Chong, but we didn't hear back from Murray. We also invited Adrian Rurafe from Labour and Debbie Ngarewa-Paka, who's running in the Te Tai Hauauru seat, but we also didn't hear back from them. But we're stoked with the 7 who've joined us tonight, so thank you for making yourselves available. We'll start with the opening statements from each candidate, and I'm inviting you, Glenn Bennett, to kick us off. Kia ora, Glenn.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody, and thank you for being here on this beautiful Taranaki evening where I am. I can see a glimmer of sunshine in the distance. So I'm Glenn Bennett. I'm the Labour Party candidate for the seat of New Plymouth. And for me, this election is about me being your voice in government. It's about me being a bridge builder between people, issues, and government. It's also, for me, it's always around your success being my success. And I want to ensure that we preserve jobs while we diversify our energy futures. And I want to also lead Taranaki on our 2050 roadmap. For those of us in the region of Taranaki, we spent last year developing our Taranaki 2050 roadmap. I was a key facilitator in that, and I want to continue to lead and to actually get things started now in terms of what the future, what a just transition looks like, what a transition to a low emissions economy looks like. I've been in this region for 20 years and I am deeply embedded in this community, deeply connected within this community. And that's why I feel like I am someone who can speak on behalf of our people, represent our people. But throughout that time, I've always been someone who hasn't been around, this is right, this is wrong. I haven't been someone who's about, it's the rural divide versus the city divide, oil and gas versus environmentalist. I've always been someone who's saying we need to come together. We need to build bridges together for our
30
future.
seconds.
And it cannot, it can no longer be those divides. We must work together to find the solutions for our future. And I believe that the Taranaki 2050 roadmap is a huge part of that. And I want to lead our region to be successful and to lead the region as the energy province, the clean energy province, not only of New Zealand, but of the world. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Glenn. Thank you for that. Annika, do you want to lead the next one? You're muted. I'll take over. The next one is Elliot Blythe from the Green Party. Elliot, it's your turn for your 2-minute opening statement.
Kia ora, whanau, ko e toko ingoa no o te poti ahau. I'm Elliot Blythe. I'm a list candidate with the Green Party. I'm at number 22, but I'm a list only candidate, so I'm not representing any electorate. So in a way, a small piece is representing Taranaki. I got into politics on the wake of the School Strike for Climate. I had the privilege of helping to organise the movement here in Wellington, where I am at the moment. And like through that, I had the opportunity to work with sitting politicians, and something that really struck me was how there were 8 politicians in the House from the Green Party who really took it seriously, and others that didn't quite take it seriously so much. So from there, I thought that the best thing that I could do to help take action on climate change was to join the Greens and to help this movement, and especially because the Greens are not just focused on climate change, but also on reducing inequality and valuing Te Tiriti o Waitangi and putting Māori issues at the forefront. The Greens have a strong vision of taking action on climate change, reducing inequality, and ensuring that nature thrives for generations to come. We've got a really awesome team in government at the moment, and I think that the trajectory that we're on is awesome, and I really want to see the amazing changes that we have to make in the future. Kia ora.
Thank you, Elliot. Can we now have Dan Thurston Crowe from the Opportunities Party?
We can, kia ora. And yeah, thanks very much for putting this on. I have to say, I think this is the toughest event that I am participating in, because it's true to say that environmental causes are the primary reason that I actually joined TOP in the first place. I came back from China, where in 2017, where I'd just seen the most dreadful environment, dreadful stewardship of the natural environment. And, you know, and living in China, I felt so proud kind of remembering Aotearoa and how pristine and amazing our natural environment is. And then I came home in 2017 and really with that new perspective that I brought back from having been away for a few years, I was genuinely shocked to see the reality of where we were headed environmentally. And part of the reason I think this is the toughest one is because we can all, everyone who's here can tell you that we care about the environment and that we're going to do something about it. And yet the crisis that we're facing is enormous. And it's, you know, like we talk about climate change, but there are issues around our diversity and the sustainability of all of our natural capital. It's a massive issue to be looking at.
30 seconds.
And I think it's quite terrifying. And I think because so many people are afraid that we're in denial, and it puts us in this position of demonizing other people for what they're doing, and really not, as Glenn said, looking at how we can collaborate and get ourselves out of the situation that we're facing right now. So I look forward to talking more about it. The format is so short for the complexity of the issues.
Time.
Thanks, Dan. Can we now have Rusty Kane from the Independent?
You're still muted, Rusty. You can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. I told you this might happen. Yeah, look, I'm Rusty Kane, and what I'm doing for our city is I'm putting forward the New Plymouth Independent seat, and that is the reason is because, like Glenn was saying, the just transition, the government has taken one way our energy sources here, in a sense, decommissioning in a sense, and then they've given us a lot of hope and promise of the just transition, but they haven't delivered, and I'm very concerned about it. So I think if the best way that we can talk with government, because I think they've let us down in a big way, is that we have our own seat and we're at the table and able to discuss these things. Because it's vital to Taranaki that it's great that where we're moving and the way we're moving, but the promises from the government so far, from what we heard and we're excited about, have not been really delivered. So that's what I'm trying to get through to people, because it's like if Auckland, for instance, for example, it's like we want to slow down the traffic, so they've demolished the bridge, but they haven't given us anything to change that with a tunnel or anything else, or rail or a pathway. They've just not given us anything back and given us some examples of how we can move forward. And
30 seconds.
And they should really lead by example. I mean, like they talk about a lot of things, but the action's not there. Like they could change their whole fleet, for instance, to EV vehicles. They could do things. They could actually put some money into some really enterprising things for the just transition to help us along. But we haven't seen that. So that's why I'm putting forward the seat as far as the environment is concerned. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Rusty. The next person is Kath Lauderdale from Social Credit. Kia ora, Kath, it's your 2 minutes.
Kia ora, everybody, and thank you for hosting this, Stuart and Barbara and everybody. I've gone to the belly of the beast in standing for Social Credit and asking you for 2 ticks. My research over many years has showed me that the problems that have been caused and that we are all facing are due to money. It's due to money, it's due to extraction, and we really have to get our heads around the fact that our whole system has been perverted to extract both out of our environment and in terms of offshore interests owning our money supply. In order, we can't actually complain about anything or have any power. We're basically captive to corporates. So, and by my analysis, the only way we can break that stranglehold on all of us plus the environment is to take back our money, our Reserve Bank control. Then we don't have to say that you've got to stay poor, this corporation has got to continue. We can control democratically how we use our own money, where we put it to clean up the environment, when we can actually say, no, enough, we don't want any more of that industry. I fear it may be too little too late, but I'm hoping that by standing for Social Credit and getting everybody's 2 ticks, I'm in a position to be able to stand and fight for the terrible things that are happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. Well, I think we have lost Vernon Tava, so let's go to Rowena Wood from Advanced Party.
Hi, can you hear me all right? Good. My name's Rowena, and a lot of you don't know who I am yet, but I'm the candidate for Advance NZ. And if you don't know much about the party, it was born very recently, maybe 10 weeks ago. And it really came from the idea of Billy Tikahika, and it was such an inspirational talks to listen to him, inspired me no end. So basically, very briefly about me, I'm a mother of 2 boys. I am a social worker by trade. I'm self-employed. Look, and I think that when it comes to the environment, maybe it's age, maybe it's I'm getting older, but I really see that we are deeply, I mean, I know you guys all know this anyway, but we are deeply connected to the soil, the living and breathing soil that is underneath our feet. It mirrors us and we mirror it. And I think that we have a spiritual obligation to take care of this land. There is no 2 ways about it. And I think from here on in, what we have to do to push back on consumerism and greed and consumption is actually start tuning into the spiritual nature of ourselves so that we fully can take care of the relationship between us and the soil. And so I am pleased to be part of this debate. Thank you for inviting me. We won't have all the answers, but together we can move mountains. That's all from me.
Kia ora everyone. That wraps up the introductions. Thanks for that. If Vernon joins us, we'll give him an opportunity as well to have a say. So I just want a big shout out to everyone who's attending and listening in. I'm just looking at the names. We've got Amanda Clinton-Godas there from City Councillor, my muser mate Andy Bassett, Catherine Chung from South Coast. I see Dina Costa from the Daily News is listening in. TRC Council Elvisa van der Leden, Fraser Bremner, Sarah Roberts from Energy Watch, Natalie Wiseman, see your name there. So kia ora everyone. It's awesome that you're listening in to this debate on climate change. We have 6 candidates at the moment, if you just joined us, who gave us their intro statement. The next little segment is based on pre-written questions that we've sent the candidates. The way we're going to run this, Annika and I will take a question each and run the candidates and give them an opportunity to respond. This is not, I'm not going to do this alphabetically anymore, so you got to be onto it. I'm going to chuck it to you and you got to be ready. Okay, so I'm going to start with question number 1 that you would have seen in your emails, hopefully. And if not, that's all right. Rusty, we haven't quite had a chance to look at it. Go freestyle. You guys be sweet ass. So I'm going to chuck it to Elliot to start with, because Elliot is definitely the youngest here tonight by the look of it. So this is about you and your generation. So we'll start with you. Given the urgent need to transition away from fossil fuels and intensive agriculture, preferably before 2030, to prevent runaway climate chaos, what would you do as a young MP down in Wellington to make that happen for your generation? Kia ora, Elliot. 2 minutes.
Kia ora, thanks very much. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Elliot, I'm just going to jump in and just say, with all you guys with your questions, or with your responses, can you please take note of equity issues, or take equity issues into account? How will the policy reduce poverty, inequality, and homelessness? How will you honour the tiriti or waitangi and address the disparities in well-being and opportunities between Māori and non-Māori communities? So when you say your answers to the following 6 questions, just keep those things in mind if you can.
Thank you, Annika.
Go for it.
Go,
okay.
Elliot.
Kia ora, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's obviously no question that urgent action is needed now. That there's really nothing we other than everything at this stage, if we want to have a shot at securing a future that we can all live in. I think that continuing the incredible work that the Green Party has done in government is a very important part. We've done things like introduce the zero carbon bill. We've included climate change in the RMA. We've done things like requiring all government decisions to be looked at through a climate change lens. But beyond that, fulfilling our party policies that we've announced in the past couple of weeks, including our agriculture policy, our energy, the future of energy policy, and the future of transport policy. Those are really, really transformational policies that will take really massive steps to reduce our contribution to climate change and to mitigate for the future. And within these policies is a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of climate justice and social justice, and how they are essentially the same thing, and you can't have one without the other. So making sure that we can bring everyone in our communities with us on a way to decarbonize, to create a zero carbon future that's prosperous for all. So yeah, basically just fully implementing the latest Green Party policies is what I would love to do.
Thank you, Elliot. Thanks for that. You got a fan in the chat, by the way, Elliot, a local Green Party person from New Plymouth just sent you a mihi. We'll chuck this question to you, Kath. Kath, you have been involved with other parties, you know, with social credit. What would you do in your party to urgently transition away from fossil fuels and intensive agriculture? Thank you, Kath.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was involved with Green Party policy, and I found the ETS, again, just monetising pollution is not going to stop it. In fact, it's probably going to promote it. So I would be promoting regulation and working in local communities, particularly with tangata whenua. They have to have their own input. We have to have discussions locally on what's going to work for each region. I don't think any party has any clue of how big this is, how much it's already affecting people. So I don't agree with the ETS scheme. I don't think we should monetise things. In fact, I'm inclined to pay people to do less. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. Thanks for that. I'll pass it to Rowena next from the Advanced Party. Rowena, I was trying to find the climate change policy of your party on your website and wasn't quite sure where you guys stood. So maybe you could enlighten us. What would you do to transition away from fossil fuels and intensive agriculture, Rowena?
Well, here is the agricultural policy from Advance NZ. It's well worth a look at. Yeah, I would encourage anyone to have a look at it, actually. Now, when I read the question, the first sense of, there was an uncomfortable feeling that I had, because if you look at the language that it's written in, there's an urgency. So we urgently need to transition away to prevent climate chaos. You know, all of these emotive language and wording all very much smack of the United Nations Agenda 21 and all the fear that that promotes. Now, just, you know, it's difficult to think clearly when we're getting these kind of fear messages drummed into us. I think we should step aside from that and open up far more reasonable, grounded discussion. Now, just quickly, just let me answer the question. I think that the decision to transition away from fossil fuels was made by this government without any consultation with the people that it sought to govern. Now, that is not democracy. And if we are truly to uphold democracy, then we need to have it in all of our affairs and all of our policies and all of the things we do. And that's really, and if we do bring back that, then we can open up the discussion to the stewards of the land, the ones that are actually looking after it, the local people.
Thank you, Rowena. Just to be clear, Agenda 21 is the United Nations Sustainability Goals, like ending poverty, rights for women. So some pretty good things in there. So we could talk more of that, but let's bring in Glenn Bennett from Labour. Jacinda said climate change is our nuclear moment. You've had 3 years where we're at, Glenn, and what would you do to transition away from fossil fuels and intensive agriculture? Thank you, Glenn.
Kia ora, Urs. I guess when I hear Rowena say that you know, there's no consultation and it's not democracy, I mean, we in New Zealand, we get to vote, and people voted for Labour, people voted for the Greens, and therefore there's a mandate for us obviously to make decisions. And we talked about this is our nuclear free moment. And I think for me personally, this is urgent. This was urgent. Actually 40 or 50 years ago, they were talking about it, and we've ignored it, and we've ignored it, and we've ignored it until now, where we can no longer ignore it. So there is serious language here that needs to be talked about, because do we have to wait till our own houses are burning before we actually make change? For me, it's around the just transition to a low carbon economy. For me, it's around also how do you, I guess, retain jobs while diversifying energy. But it's also things like Taranaki, which is the new clean energy centre which we have here in Taranaki, and how can we utilise that to its fullest effect to find new sources of energy. But one thing I'm really curious about is we don't often talk about stop taking on our energy usage, and how can I personally decrease my energy usage so we don't have as much of a crisis as we do now. For me personally, I've made a stand on that. You are looking at me sitting in my tiny home, which is basically sitting in my lounge, my bedroom, my dining room, my kitchen. We have solar panels on the roof, so we're fairly self-sufficient here, but also really want to think around how we look at our economy. And I know that in the next term, I really want to champion within the Labour caucus to look at the idea of donut economics and Kate Raworth's work, and how we can actually have an economy, but an economy that's sustainable.
Thanks for that, Glenn. Let's go to Rusty. Rusty, you've run previously in the Tauranga seat, you know, running in New Plymouth as an independent. Climate change is tonight's topic. What would you do to urgently, with the urgency at hand in terms of moving away, transitioning away from fossil fuels?
Well, this is not a New Plymouth independent question, but it's personally, I'm a biosoil consultant. So for 20 years, I've been telling farmers to get away from fertilizers. So I've been battling fertilizer companies for years. And it's about the riparian planting near the rivers, which is not enough because they do die out after a while and things, but it's also natural fertilizers, which is in from the riparian planting around their farms to act as a filter, basically, to stop the sediments and nitrogen going into the streams, which is a problem here. We don't notice it so much in Taranaki, but it's still really bad because we've got fast flowing rivers. Basically, they don't really sit around too long to go to the sea, but the crap is still there, if you excuse the word. So I don't know how we get about it, but it's not the farmer himself as the enemy. I've gone around a lot of farmers, and especially the organic farmers, but they tell me that they want to use natural fertilizers, they want to do all these things, but we're finding that it's more and more a corporate well, farming is more corporatized now. Like farmers that are on the actual land don't own the farms, so they go through a system where they're managed by the owner of the farm does a deal with a fertilizer company, and that's what the owner has to do, the farmer has to do, which is he doesn't usually own the property anymore. So we're having all those sort of problems as well. So that's sort of the agriculture sector. The farmers really want to help. They're trying to do things, but they, with the ripening ground, they basically have to pay for it themselves. And the regional council here, the Taranaki Regional Council, is doing a really good job where they're working with the farmer, but it's a really slow process, and I don't know how we're going to get around that. The other way is away from the farming is that just stop buying all the crap. You know, we're adding to the problem, and that's basically what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Thanks for that. And we'll go to Dan. Dan from the Opportunities Party. Your background says, don't leave change to chance. How do we change? How do we transition away from fossil fuels and intensive agriculture? Dan, this is your pitch.
Like I said, so complex to answer in a couple of minutes. And I took both Kath and Rusty for bringing up local government, the role of local government, and Kath on bringing tangata whenua into this as well, because it is a complex issue, and we have to work together. There are, from a political standpoint, and what can we do? There's a couple of things that government can do in terms of looking forward and looking how we come through this issue. So one of them is by sending signals, and so one of the signals that TOP put out a long time ago is an attitude of polluters pay with no exceptions. So from our perspective, carbon needs a price. We have to use market mechanisms to send signals. We only have carrots and sticks. So we have to both incentivize behaviors that we want to see leading us out of carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. But we also have to, we have to incentivize good behaviors like making businesses and homes more sustainable. But I love that you recognize the need for equity for, in terms of low income people, in terms of the most marginalized, in terms of tangata whenua, because we do have to come back to the underlying causes of even why our political system works and why we're driven by short-term thinking. And so much of it is about the instability that we have in society because of poverty. So one of the things we can attack immediately is unaffordable housing and provide a safety net through universal basic income.
Kia ora, thank you, Dan. Thanks to the six of you. I'm not sure what happened to Vernon, he's gone, but thanks for answering that first question. Just to the audience, everyone who's listening in, thanks for being here with us. You've got the opportunity to use the chat function and the Q&A function and we'll use some of those questions later on in the session. You can also vote them up, give them a like if you like a question, and we'll go to the ones that have most likes. That's how this works these days. I'll pass it to Annika for the next question. Ka koe.
Thanks, Oz. Yeah, I've just had a message from Vernon, and he's struggling with a connection. So he's going to try and join us a bit later, but if not, he sends his apologies to everybody. I'm going to throw a bit of a spanner in the works, and I'm going to jump to question 6, just to keep everybody on their toes and awake. So candidates, what is your approach to helping Taranaki's fossil fuel workers and intensive animal agriculture workers retrain and find new employment in less environmentally damaging industries? How would you foster new educational and training opportunities for young people to engage in professions and industries that enable an effective, just transition to an environmentally and socially sustainable future? And I am going to start with Glenn Bennett. Take it away.
Why, thank you. Just a light question on a Tuesday evening. Thanks for that. I wish it was really simple, and it's not. And I think, well, I know that the future of work, not only when it comes to the environment, but when it comes to all of our society, the future of work is changing. and is going to look very different. For me, I guess there's a couple of things that come to mind that I've been thinking about. One is what about the doing proper remedial work on the oil and gas wells that have ended already. So there's some that have been badly plugged by overseas industry that potentially we could actually have some of our trained oil and gas workers now actually go around and ensure that all past oil and gas wells are securely plugged correctly, so they will never leak into the future. But I guess I come back to the Taranaki 2050 roadmap and also the role that an organisation like WIT, our tertiary educator, plays in the future here. How can WIT flex and move with the changing times around moving to a low carbon economy when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to energy, and how do we find pathways for them to retrain and for WIT to be at the leading edge of that? With Taranaki, I want them to be an organisation that's developing new technologies in energy, but also want them to be finding pathways as part of that work for our oil and gas workers, for those with the skills, rather than going overseas and supporting oil and gas in other parts of the world, that they want to remain here in Taranaki and in New Zealand working in the clean energy sector.
Brilliant. Thanks, Glenn. Awesome. I just want to ask the candidates, would you like me to read the question every time, or are you happy just to kind of go straight into it? I know that we're really conscious of time. So go for it.
I'm okay.
Okay. All right. Well, Dan just volunteered to go next. So over to you, Dan.
Me and my big mouth. Can I introduce everyone to the universal basic income? It is the way TOPS policy is structured around this. We give every Kiwi of working age $250 a week, no questions asked. I would also introduce you to the Opportunities Party as the original evidence-based party. UBI has been trialled countless times in numerous different environments, different communities. Every time, pretty much if you look at the statistics and meta research that's happened looking at universal basic income and its impacts, there are a number of things that happen that are really good for, we're talking, you asked us to consider inequities and the tangata whenua. What happens when a UBI is introduced? Some people actually choose to stop work and stay home and bring up kids, and some people choose to stop work and take care of elders. More work happens in more social work and volunteer work happens. A lot of people leave their jobs and retrain, and there's a massive opportunity for WIT in this. It also increases entrepreneurialism because it gives people that guaranteed base of income, a safety net to rely on, to explore creatively what they might do next. UBI isn't the answer to everything, but it will go a massive way to underpinning our resilience in Taranaki and enable the growth of a diverse set of industries that reduce our reliance on oil and gas and dairy.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Right, for that same question, we're going to go now to Kath Lauderdale from Social Credit Party. Over to you, Kath.
Thank you. Yes, social credit doesn't have the same economic constraints that all of the other parties do, because we would take ownership of our reserve bank back. Obviously, universality is a very important thing about payment to individuals. So although the top policy, just 250, anyone who's raised children or lived knows that's just not going to touch the sides. So we would have available the wherewithal to put resources wherever a local community wants to do it to change their production. We could even take on mortgages onto our own reserve bank balance sheet in order to take offshore banks out of our country. So mortgages could be relieved, there'd be enough income for everybody. Not people generally don't choose to do these jobs if they don't, you know, if they don't have to, if they're not coerced to with lots and lots of money or conditions. So social credit has the financial wherewithal to give a good alternative for everybody, including the farmers. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kath. We'll go Rusty Kane, independent. Over to you, Rusty.
Yeah, this is it's going to be a big problem. I think Rowana mentioned it before. We needed to communicate a lot better, and I think the government again has let us down with the resources to know where we're actually going. There's a lot of people in the oil industry that just really don't know what's going on and thinking of leaving the country and getting out of it. But we really need their skills here. We need their skills, we need their families, we need that here. In farming, I'm concerned because it's becoming a real technical thing now, being farmers, that it's getting very computerized, so they know where their losses are and things like that. But the other issue when we talk about this, there's a lot of farms now being brought by iwi and a Maori ownership, and they're going towards farming. That's a big part of their economic base. And no one's really thought about that or really mentioned it, that I've noticed, that, you know, that they rely on these things. And what do we got? I can understand that the government really needed to be putting in measures and explaining things a lot better to everyone. And so I'm just saying that the government needs to put more into our education. And if it's going to be transition, what are we going into? We've got to give us some hope. What are we doing with these people? What are we going to? That's what we need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Let's go Elliot Blythe from the Green Party.
Kia ora, thanks very much. So this is obviously, as other candidates have touched on, an incredibly difficult issue, and there is no silver bullet. There's no one answer, and certainly not an answer that we can give in 2 minutes. But really quickly, I just wanted to touch on the UBI. I fully support universal basic income as a concept, but as Kath has pointed out, $250 a week is simply not enough to live a dignified life on, which is why I'm support of the Green Party's guaranteed minimum income of at least $325 per week, which would be enough to support everyone into doing all those nice creative pursuits, but actually do it in a dignified way. I think that a huge part of it will undoubtedly be transitioning to into the renewable energy industry that will thrive. And there's actually, I think, more transferable skills than a lot of people realize. Like, for example, an electrical engineer who works in mining would have the skills and knowledge that's relevant to renewable energy. So really, there's a lot of intersectionality between really the energy industry of old and the sustainable future that we are moving towards. Or another example would be offshore oil and gas workers could help support things like offshore wind turbines. Hydrogen's been pointed out as well. I think that hydrogen will have a role, and helping converting people into that is important as well. The Green Party's energy, the Clean Energy Plan includes provisions for a massive training infrastructure project to support people into these new green industries. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Elliot. Lucky last, Rowena Wood from the Advanced Party. Go for it.
All right. Before I answer the question, I'm just going to go back to the point I made earlier about the United Nations Agenda 21, and I can't really apologise for doing that. I feel a bit like the canary down the mine. This is not going to win me any popularity votes at all, but if we're going to talk about that, we're going to have a real discussion, then it's really helpful to have that discussion with people that have looked into both sides of the argument, the stuff that comes down from the government and also the other stuff. So I would thoroughly support you in looking at Rosa Corey's Behind the Green Mask, the UN Agenda 21. If we're really going to work through the mess that we're in, then people really need to do their due diligence. So I'll put that aside, but I'm prepared to go into that discussion whenever's necessary. Look, with it, in terms of transitioning and helping Taranaki's fossil fuel workers to move into other sectors, it's not difficult. We've got enough Kiwi ingenuity in this country to clean this mess up. We can train people in the manufacture of solar, wind, we can run off the river, hydro and wave technology. These are all new technologies that people can begin to train themselves in, learn more about. There are so many other clean green technologies that may have been suppressed or that we don't even know about that we'd like to know about. Yeah. So I think we can do this without a globalized agenda that was made up in the foreign halls of power and that we're all supposed to conform to. So there you have it.
Thank you, Rowena. So that's everyone. Thank you for your answers for question 6. I'm going to hand back over to Urs for the next question.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, everyone. This next segment is on transport. So whether you're a boy racer or a bike enthusiast, I want to hear from you what your thoughts are on transport. Road vehicle emissions make up 37% of New Zealand's emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. What would you do? What's your plan to bring those emissions down? Are you into public transport? Are you into trains? Are you into carpooling? Are you into horse and cart? What are we going to do, people? I'm going to start with Dan. Dan, what's your thoughts? What's TOP going to do for us for transport? Thank you, Dan. Dan, you muted. You got to unmute yourself. And we'll start again with 2 minutes now.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Yeah, so just as an aside, I've just put up our UBI versus GMI asthma wallpaper. Just because it's literally only when you're at $0 that you get $250 income. As soon as you start earning any money, you are effectively above the GMI with our UBI. In the meantime, back to road vehicle emissions. So actually, according to my information, and this may be pedantic, I apologize if it is, it's not 37% of our entire greenhouse emissions, it's 37% of the energy sector's emissions. So it makes 15% actually of our total emissions. It doesn't actually matter. It's still a massive issue, and that does not mean that we don't take it seriously. So the what we want to do is consign the RMA to what it's actually originally for, which is really about environmental protection, and introduce a UDA, which is a Urban Development Act. The purpose of that act is to basically give local councils much more autonomy over development, to increase density around public and active transport hubs, in the interests of creating the 15-minute city. So basically what we can do is enable people to get everything that they want within 15 minutes of where they live using public or active transport. Of course, Taranaki is a very spread out region. There are people who need cars. We still need roads. We need to subsidize the electrification also of our transportation, and look at mechanisms like removing fringe benefit tax on EVs and things like that. So again, a range of empowering.
Dan, your 2 minutes are up, and you got muted by Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. You're doing so well with timekeeping. And it's the cool thing about these debates is I can ask you a question about transport, and you can answer with UBI or legalizing cannabis or the racing industry, whatever you want. So, Rowena Wood, you got 2 minutes to give us your spiel on transport. How do we? And Dan, you're quite right, because 50% of our emissions are from agriculture. So, yes, indeed. So, Rowena, how are we going to get these emissions down in terms of transport? What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, when I first looked at that question, I thought about improving our train system. What a wonderful country to have a really good rail link. That was my thought on transport. Regarding the amount of CO2 that New Zealand produces each year, my estimation from what I've read, it's about 80 million tons of CO2 is produced each year. Now that figure, in terms when you then look at what China produces, that figure grows by, in China, every 11 weeks. I mean, what's coming out of China, their emissions are just phenomenal. So really, we're small players. Unless we do something about China and the emissions that they are producing, it's going to be a very, you know, realistically, we're not going to be able to have much of an impact. Yeah, it's the larger nations, you need to do their bit as well. And we need to make sure, we need to hold them to that. And there are ways that we can do that. And there are certain aspects of trade that we can tax and regulate a bit tougher, really, to ensure that they do reduce their emissions.
Thank you, Rowena. We are separated or connected only through screens, but I did see Elliot shaking his head before, so maybe we'll flick it over to Elliot to pick up on the transport or whatever you want to talk about, Elliot. Yeah, transport is the topic, but you've got 2 minutes.
Kia ora, absolutely. Yeah, so this couldn't have come on a better day because just today at 1 p.m. we've announced our Transport for the Future plan, and I'm really excited about that. I'm going to get to that in a second. On the question before, cannabis, yes, absolutely. So the China, big emissions from a big country, we can't do anything. If we spend all of our time pointing the finger and saying we need to wait until their emissions get down, we're not going to make any change. New Zealand has some of the highest emissions in the OECD, so we can't afford to not act here. New Zealand has similar emissions profile to the city of Los Angeles, which is part of America. We can't say that the city of Los Angeles shouldn't make anything because they have only a small percentage of America's emissions. This is something that we all need to play a part together. Just to really quickly rattle off the incredibly exciting things in our Transport for the Future plan. It's a really critical moment that we act on this because investing in infrastructure is the best way that we can ride out of the COVID-19 pandemic. On your point of rail, that's massive in our plan. We want to sustainably reboot regional economies with large-scale investment in rapid intercity passenger rail, which includes to New Plymouth via Whanganui and Palmerston North. We'll be investing in urban development by accelerating transformational rapid transit projects throughout all major cities. We'll provide safe, separated school and commuter cycling routes to be used by thousands of people each day with a $1.5 billion cycle superhighway fund. We'll require new vehicles to be net zero emissions by 2030, and we'll set standards to incentivize heavy freight to transition to zero emissions to be 100% renewable by 2050. And we'll make public transport free for everyone under 18, and hopefully I'm under time.
Well done, Elliot. You were clearly prepared for that question. And we'll flick the question to Rusty. Rusty, what are we going to do about transport? Rail, public transport, bikes, carpooling. What's your thoughts?
Well, here in Taranaki, we do hydrogen for the heavy transport for a start. But the trouble with all our new transition, new green technologies is the fact that the government's not supporting them. We've got to look at all avenues and get behind them and see what works and get behind it. So that's still the biggest problem we have is government not resourcing all these startups. They just don't get behind them properly, and we need to get the government involved. But also with the government is that we can't have one government do one thing and then the next election another government changes it again. We've got to have cross-party consensus on it right through the government on what we need to do in this country. I mean, obviously for years and years we've made a mess of everything really because everything relies on vehicles basically. We've downgraded our rail, then we bring it up, then we downgrade it again, then we think of something else, and it just gets ludicrous and expensive, and it seems to be just for political circles of every 3 years it chops and changes. You might have good ideas now, you get them to the planning stage to go, and another government comes in and they say, oh, we're not doing that now, and it's just ridiculous. But anyway, my say from here is get behind the hydrogen, get the government in, get it involved, get it going. And you've got to back it up. You know, you got to have it. You know, you got to have stations around the country. You got to be able to go somewhere and come back. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. The government's not doing enough. It feels like there needs to be flicked to you, Glenn, as we're presenting Labour. What are we going to do about transport, Glenn? How are those emissions coming down? What's your vision?
Thank you. And I guess in terms of, Rusty saying that we're doing nothing, we're putting no money into it. Well, I know that this government has invested more than previous governments in terms of public transport and cycleways. So 163% more has gone into public transport in this government, as well as 227% more into investment in walkways and cycleways. So that's a start. We've invested in co-funding over 1,000 EV charging stations around the country, as well as the low emission vehicle contestable fund to accelerate the uptake of electric vehicles. And this is a huge one. And I was talking to someone this morning about this in terms of how do we support our big business in terms of their fleet vehicles, if they can have all electric, and then they obviously move them down to being secondhand, which then suddenly changes the prices of our vehicles, our electric vehicles. For me and my partner, last year we looked at buying an EV. We just could not afford to buy even a cheap secondhand EV. It was out of our league. So we've got to keep working on this and how the government supports that. In terms of us want to tautoko Elliott's, and I really want to support the Green Party announcement today. I think around that public transport and around that intercity transport, that's will be a huge win for us. And as a Labour Party representative, I do want to support that. And for this region, obviously, we've got issues in our isolation, but I want to figure out how we can connect better. And finally, I just want to mention around this whole thing, as well as Elliot said, around we have to focus on New Zealand. We have to focus on Taranaki. I have to focus on my own home here on Mill Road in New Plymouth. And my neighbour, I notice, not judgy, but they never put their recycling bins out ever. They always, just every fortnight, I see them with their other bins. Does that mean that I don't put my recycling bins out? Does that mean I don't put out my my waste bins? No, I put them out because that is the right thing for me to do. And just because my neighbour isn't doing it doesn't mean that I shouldn't, because at least I can do the right thing, set an example, and who knows, we maybe export those examples and ideas to the rest of the world.
Kia ora, thank you, Glenn. Kath, just like us, I believe you live at the coast here in Taranaki. We got one bus a week from Opunaka to New Plymouth. That's public transport for the coast. How good's that, or how not good is that? What would you do in terms of transport emissions, Kath?
Yeah, I think public transport is completely dysfunctional. I think it should be free, it should be electric, it should be mass transport, especially in towns. And if we're going to have to change our life, which I believe we are, there's nothing wrong with walking, biking. Far more healthier lifestyles is what I'm hoping to promote. I mean, I don't mean to sound picky, but all of these great policies that are being dropped now are being dropped when the election was meant to be over. And these policies, for 3 years, they haven't been done. And in fact, the only promotion was having a train up to Palmerston. So when I say to you, you can't trust these establishment parties, I mean it. So yes, I'm with you on better public transport. I have to have a hybrid because yes, I have to travel a lot. It was the best I could do. So the main thing we've got to realise is that they're going to put it on us as individuals, but it is industry that has done this polluting, and they haven't kept us informed or allowed us to adapt. And that is what the governments, successive governments are entirely responsible for doing to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kath. Thank you all for your answers around transport. I'll pass it back to you, my co-facilitator, Annika. Just a reminder to everyone to use the chat and the Q&A function. And if you've got questions, plonk them in there and we'll pick them up later on tonight. Annika.
Thanks. I hope everyone is still super engaged and awake and enjoying hearing a little bit more about from our candidates. Now, we're going to go into agriculture. So animal agriculture in Taranaki is the biggest contributor to New Zealand's greenhouse emissions, both through its dependence on fossil fuel and through methane, nitrous oxide emissions. How would you propose to turn this around? Please comment on opportunities for diversification of horticulture, urban farming, and taking the dairy industry as a model, options for regenerative and organic approaches versus high input export reliant models. Oh, it's a biggie. And we're going to go with Rowena Wood to start with. Don't forget to unmute.
There we go. We're unmuted. It's a big question. They're all really big questions, and it's difficult to answer in such a short space of time. But I do think we need to reframe our agricultural policies. We need to provide the economic environment, opportunities, resources, and all appropriate legislation for the agricultural sector to flourish and thrive, whilst working together to protect our waterways, our soil, and our indigenous flora and fauna. We need to be doing that. Now, how are we going to do that? How are we going to look after Taranaki while we are all bound to a global agenda that sets the tone from the top and that we all have to follow? How can we take into account regional variations and differences in the farming environment? How can we really stand up for our people when we are being held to ransom by a global agenda? That's one of the main struggles that we're going to face as we attempt to look after the infrastructure in this region. Yeah, I mean, you'll have to help me with that one, because until we can free ourselves of the constraints of these globalized agendas, we can never bring the real stuff back to the regions and get the custodians of the sector involved, the local council, the stakeholders involved, and writing out much more localized plans rather than this big agenda that will eventually hurt us. It will eventually hurt us, and we need to put the brakes on. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Rowena. Yes, some good points there. Let's go to Dan from the Opportunities Party.
Yeah, this is, you know, again, these are such kind of specialist questions, and you know, one thing I can repeatedly say about TOP is we don't kind of come out with knee-jerk policy. We have subject matter experts really looking at the evidence of what's going on, why it's going on, and what the options are for solutions. And we have Venture Taranaki here, who is actually working quite hard on looking at how to diversify our economic future. And like, just, you know, there's a few interesting things going on. One is, I don't know if anyone noticed, but during lockdown globally, there was a massive rise in the purchase of proteins, plant-based proteins, rather than, you know, over traditional dairy and meat. And that in a region that's so heavily dependent on dairy as one of its main industries, that should be alarming. We really do need to look at the resilience of agriculture and how we diversify. And I was part of Venture Taranaki's, alongside Glenn actually, I facilitated the food and fiber workshops in Hawera, looking at, you know, bringing locals together and really looking at what the opportunities around food and fiber are for the region. One of the issues that we face here that Venture Taranaki has found in repeated reports on alternative land use is we don't have the local infrastructure, processing and transportation infrastructure that allows an easy transition away from dairy and into other agricultural products. We need to think long term. We need to be building that kind of processing and transport infrastructure to enable diversification and exploration, particularly into plant-based proteins and how, for the effect that they'll have on the environment.
Oh, and you've got muted, but thank you. That was a great answer. And yes, very interesting about the plant-based proteins. Big fan myself. Let's go to Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora. Man, you guys are tough. This is a tough gig, I tell you, tonight. Last night they just turned the microphone off, but we could just keep talking as long as we like because we're in a hall and people could still hear us. But anyway, I'm cutting into my valuable time right now, down to 1 minute and 38, whatever it is. So for Labour, Fit for a Better World recognises that within a generation, modern regenerative production systems will be changing with part of our primary industry. And I think, as Dan said, it's around diversification, and how do we do that better? And we look at examples around the maunga that things are already being done. But how do we support that? And from a Labour policy point of view, we've just announced we're investing $50 million in terms of a farm planning framework to actually support our farmers Because I think the thing is here, for me personally, that we've talked about it earlier, farmers aren't necessarily the villains. Often there are some villains out there in every industry, but they're wanting to do the right thing, and they care deeply about our place and our environment, and how do we actually support them, not just sort of, again, I said at the start, not them against us against them, but how do we actually work together. I think a huge part of this is how do we recognise our Indigenous people, and how Māori practices around land usage and protection of the land are used. I look at examples, and I know that Pariaka's working hard in terms of what they're doing there on their land, and I tautoko that. But I really think it is around us working together and finding constructive ways forward. We need to, dare I say, we need to come alongside federated farmers and talk to them about what are the gaps or the things that are stopping farmers from thinking about diversification of their land. What is it that might actually make them choose to have some dairy, but also have other plant-based products on their land? But it's also, I guess, getting us away from our need for dairy and our need for constant meat.
Constant meat consumption. I'm going to finish your sentence there. I'm hoping that's what you were going to say. Nailed it. Okay, great. Okay, moving to Kath Lauderdale from Social Credit Party. Go for it.
What was the question? This is regulation around how we support.
Yep. I guess moving, because we have such a high we contribute, our animal agriculture contributes a lot to our greenhouse gases, and how would you propose we can turn this around and diversify?
So I would like to regulate against ecocide, forget ETSs, work with farmers and rewild. I personally think that's a really good way for us to stop importing all the, if we stop buying from China and buying their crap and making our own again, then they will have less reason to pollute. So I like the idea of rewilding. I'd like to regulate against ecocide for individuals that do it, get the corporations out of our primary industries. And I'm not worried about the UN, because I don't think anyone's going anywhere, and they're a pretty dysfunctional I don't know how they'll get here. So, and as long as we don't fall down the religious bigotry, the control of women, the racism, then I think we'll be moving ahead. I don't feel as negative about this change that we're going to have to make as possibly others. I think it's almost life-saving. So rewilding is what I'd do.
Great, thanks, Kath. I'm sorry, team, I missed a lot of that. My network is, I don't know whether it's the weather, but I'm fading in and out. So hopefully you can all hear me okay. If I disappear, I've been blown away maybe. Anyway, let's go to Elliot Blythe of the Green Party. Over to you.
Yeah, so I want to start by acknowledging that agriculture is obviously incredibly important to New Zealand, and that also we do have some of the most efficient agriculture in the world, and that's not something that I feel like you often hear a Green Party candidate talking about, but there it is. But obviously it's still a serious problem, and it lacks principles of kaitiakitanga throughout it, the whole kind of dairy industry. So I mean, this is just really convenient because we have just introduced plans on almost all of these questions that have been asked. But in our sustainable agriculture plan, we are doing a range of things, including introducing a fund to move towards regenerative agriculture. It's a $297 million fund compared to the $50 million fund from Labour. We'll be working within Te Tiriti o Waitangi to establish better resources management around water. We'll be banning fertilizers that are harmful to the environment, like PKE. We'll set a fair price on agriculture using the emissions trading scheme, and we will create an accreditation scheme for agriculture products. Thank you. And we'll so basically lots of cool things to make farming better, as well as changing the model a little bit to not incentivize commodity products, but instead value-based products, and also helping that move towards more plant-based things.
Finished. Great, Elliot. Awesome. And lucky last, Rusty Kane, independent.
Right. Thank you. Things are changing in the farming sector. Well, about 15 years ago now, Fonterra, we had organic farms and stuff around Taranaki, and it's starting to go really well. And then Fonterra just walked away from it. So Fonterra is the main issue here, as far as I can see, and they can change things as well, and it's starting to happen. And it's because of you. It's because of what the customer wants. They've realised now, instead of giving mass lots of milk and all that sort of thing, is not the way to go. It's quality products, giving the best value. People want to know where their product's coming. So now Fonterra are now telling the farmers, they're getting rid of the dirty farmers, and they're putting restrictions on them if they do that. They're starting to tell them how to do their land use if they want to use them as a supplier. So it's really up to the places like the corporates, like Fonterra, and it's you that's changing their attitude, and it's your demanding on how you want the food and where it comes from is changing the whole product and the whole system of farming for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Yeah, I totally believe that each of us as individuals can make a big difference to our animal agriculture, and it is just a supply and demand thing. So we stop needing dairy and meat, and then they will farm it differently. And yeah, Fonterra and federated farmers, we need to work alongside them. So great answers, everybody. I'm going to stop right there and hand over to Oz for the next question.
Awesome. For a second there, I thought you're running as well, Annika, but awesome. Thank you for your answers, everyone. The next question is around the concept that Kath introduced in her little spiel just before, the concept of ecocide. So we're all familiar with the term genocide, killing people en masse. The term ecocide is maybe less known, but it's pretty self-explanatory, really. There's a growing international call to make ecocide I suppose, similar to genocide and international crime. So I suppose we wanted to know from you candidates, where do you stand on this? Do you think ecocide is something that needs to be in our Crimes Act? Is it something that needs to be done through the UN? Is it something that needs to be done? How should it be done? Given that you started this conversation, Kath, I'll flick it to you to kick us off. Is that all right, Kath? Ecocide.
Yeah, that's fine. I started it. It's my fault. Yeah. So ecocide, I think, is a much more direct way, given globalization is likely not going to come back in the way it was. It's a very direct way for communities to deal with polluters, in that they're just charged it's essentially a crime against humanity. And I truly believe it is, because even what we've seen in Taranaki, we can't clean up the mess they've made. They won't clean it up themselves. It's here forever. You know, that pollution is here forever. And no amount of monetizing pollution or blaming individuals for what they put in their mouth and charging them or looking down on them is going to change the fact that our environment has been polluted and will just keep getting more polluted unless we confront the reality. It is a crime against humanity. So I'm all for that. Regulation, but local, you know, within New Zealand. Thank you.
Kia ora, Kath. Clear words there. Rusty Kane, is ecocide a concept that you're familiar with and something you would support New Zealand making a stand on?
No, I'm not. But from what I've just heard, I'd say that's a good way to go looking at it. I think it's, if that can clean it up and we can do that, and you give me evidence that will work, yeah, I'm for that. That's basically what I say. I don't know enough about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Dan, where does TOP stand on ecocide? Is that part of your policy plan to implement ecocide, to bring it into the Crimes Act, for example?
Yeah, you know, again, I think this question relies on a certain degree of expertise that I don't have. And I do know from discussions inside TOP that that there are aspects of around definitions that make this a little problematic. So primarily I can speak from my own experience rather than from a TOP policy position. So I do see granting personhood status to our natural taonga as an amazing step for Aotearoa to send a signal, and also to start bringing in concepts of kaitiakitanga into our like daily way of being. So I think that's fantastic. I got back March this year from a year on a conservation ship. And primarily spending time in doing biodiversity research in Mexico, but also more active fisheries enforcement and enforcement around illegal activities on terrestrial national parks. And something that I'm aware of in the 27 seconds I have remaining is what you see when you really engage in the coalface around environmental issues is how much economic deprivation drives people into terrible acts on the environment. So there's a systemic issue that we have to get to rather than just simply looking at the people who are causing the harm.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that. Rowena, what's your thoughts? If a company or individual causes extensive damage to an ecosystem, should they be charged with ecocide?
I think that those types of issues, and where there are discretions or violations rather of green policy, they can be dealt with locally through the implementation of locally created green strategy. When I read this question, it's got the shadowy side of Agenda 21 all over it. The pressure, listen to the language, the pressure from the UN. It's very dramatic. It's very, because the growing consensus around those of us that are really looking into this agenda from both sides is that it's less about the environment and more about the control of human beings and less about the environment. It's about the introduction of communism, communitarianism. So you'll start to see, if we go down this global agenda, if we go down this road, you'll start to see heavy tariffs, people grassing themselves, their neighbors up, and helplines for this, to grass this person up. You'll start to see heavy taxes. People will have to start paying for water. It's a disguise. It's the green mask, guys. We've got to get out of these globalized agendas if we're ever going to really solve this. I don't think criminalizing and frightening people is the way forward. I think that we've got enough maturity to sit round the table, put together a locally created green strategy, and eliminate the intrusion and infiltration of globalized agendas from the United Nations. This is really serious, guys. This is about the most serious thing that we have faced so far. And I would urge you to look into it. Don't just take what's coming down at you from mainstream sources.
Thank you for that. Let's go to you, Glenn Bennett, candidate for the Labour Party. Ecocides, should that be used to get, to deal with people who damage ecosystems, companies or individuals alike? Is that a solution? Is that a path the Labour Party would support?
I'm not sure where to start, really. I think the United Nations plays a huge role in the protection of our environment, of our health, of Indigenous people. And a huge example for me of this, and this is where I have no fear, and I think this language is, we have to bring about change quickly. I look at Rio Tinto in Australia just this year, where they blew up, for the sake of progress in their own interests, they blew up a sacred site for the Aboriginal people that was more than 40,000 years old. And that, I know it's that slightly different to what we're talking about here, but that I hope that the United Nations can have a role to play to support the Australian government to ensure that the people who did that are held to account. But in terms of locally, I guess here for ecocide, I did some quick research on this because I wasn't 100% familiar with it. But I was really surprised that the Russian Federation, that Ukraine, that Vietnam and Belarus have all signed up to this. And I think that surprised me, and it also gave me hope. And I think that for us here, we do need to be more active, and we need to be more in tune with the idea of dealing with this and being open to it. So for me personally, like I say, our policy isn't strictly set in stone on this, but from a personal perspective, as a human being, I support this.
Thank you, Glenn. And finally, Elliot, ecocide, is that a Green Party policy, having ecocide in our crowns there?
Yeah, I'm not actually specifically aware of whether ecocide is a Green Party policy, but what I can say is one of the most memorable placards that was held up in the School Strike for Climate, which happened almost exactly a year ago, was climate change is Pacific genocide. And it's a strong sign, and I think it's absolutely true. When we're seeing that already we are losing Pacific Islands. There are Pacific Islands that no longer exist because of climate change. That when cultures are threatened and people's livelihoods are threatened, that this is absolutely an act of at least cultural genocide. So I think recognizing ecocide as a material thing that can be charged against is absolutely essential to holding polluting companies and polluting governments to account when it comes to taking these immensely disruptive actions that do have serious, like tangible and existential impacts to many people in our both in Aotearoa and in the Pacific. I think that having it in New Zealand legislation is probably a good idea, but again, I cannot speak to Green Party policy on that. That is just my opinion.
Thank you, Elliot. Diplomatic answer there at the end. Thank you. I think I haven't missed anyone. There was the 6 of you. Thanks for answering the ecocide question. We got one more planned question before we grab a couple of. Oh, Kath. No,
yes, I can just say it isn't in green policy. I know that.
Okay, thank you for that. Cool. I thought I missed you out, but you were first. That's right. So I'll pass it to Annika for the last prepared question before we grab a couple of the audience questions. So just a reminder to attendees to put questions in the Q&A and like them if you like them. So Annika, over to you.
Great, thanks. All right, we're going to shoot back up to number 2. The UK has set 2025 as a target date to end permitting for fossil fuel homes, i.e. no more use of natural gas for space and water heating. Would you support a similar target date for New Zealand? Our very own New Plymouth District Council recently launched a scheme which provides interest-free loans to ratepayers to support sustainable home projects. Would you support the government rolling this out nationwide? Let's go, Elliot Blythe, Green Party.
Kia ora. Yeah, so I think I want to start by pointing out that heating homes by gas is something that is huge in the UK, and it's the kind of the default that every house has, whereas in New Zealand we have some of the highest uses of heat pumps in the world. So it is not as big of an issue as it is in the UK, but still obviously incredibly important. I do personally support that target of eliminating fossil fuel homes. I think that's really important, and we do obviously have the technology to do it in a much more efficient way using electric methods like heat pumps. As a part of our clean energy plan, we include a $250 million fund, which will go to community groups, iwi and hapu, to go towards their renewable energy project. And I think that local generation and that local kind of grassroots organization of energy networks is absolutely essential to making our energy network cleaner, smarter, more efficient, and just better in every way. So yeah, I think that this is an important thing. Kia ora.
Thanks, Elliot. Let's go Glenn Bennett from the Labour Party.
Thank you. Kia ora. So the Labour Party has committed to having 100% renewable electricity by 2030, which is less than 10 years away. We've also established the $100 million Green Investment Fund to help shift private investment towards the zero carbon economy, which is a good thing. And a big thing for me, and I guess it sort of tags on to what the council's doing here, which I say thank you, Annika, for supporting that, in terms of investing in warmer and dry energy efficient homes, which promotes energy efficiency around the Warmer Kiwi Homes program. And for me, I've lived my whole life in New Zealand, all of 45 years, and that time I lived in just classic Kiwi homes that were drafty, weren't insulated, etc., etc. This year is the first year that I've ever lived in an insulated and a double glazed in a north-facing home, and I can say getting housing right, getting warm, dry, safe housing right is a game changer in terms of everything when it comes to education, health, well-being, also energy, and the cost of running a home. And I'm really, really supportive of this government and the Labour Party continue to support our work around our Warmer Kiwi Homes program.
Great, thanks, Glenn. Let's go, Kath Lauderdale, Social Credit Party. Go for it.
Thank you. Yes. Well, social credit doesn't have the problem that all the other parties have, because we know that social credit was used by the Reserve Bank to get us out of the Great Depression. It was used to support state advances, loans for homes. It was used by the Rural Bank to develop farms. There is absolutely no reason we can't do that right now using our Reserve Bank, give everybody a loan for whatever home they need, and make sure the regulations are good for a good standard. There's no reason we can't offer that to our New Zealand citizens, and there's no reason we can't be probably fossil free much, much sooner than the establishment is telling us we can be, because they're tied in with the corporate fiscal offshore money situation, which we don't need to be. So I think these are very conservative targets. They're too late, they're too slow, and we could do it a lot quicker. Thank you.
Thanks, Kath. Let's go, Rusty Kane, Independent.
Rusty Kane. Yes, I support what you're doing there with the council. I also think they should go further, because it's, of course, dry homes are where the basis of health and the poverty and where the sickness mainly comes from. So if you sort that out, that's great, but it's obviously not going fast enough, and not enough that's been done. But your council could also do things like solar panels on all their pensioner flats. They got quite a few of those. They all face north. Why don't they do things like that? Why don't they lead in that way as well, and show the rest of the community what the council is doing in those sort of areas? And I think they could actually go further. They could get compensated where the person doesn't have to pay the pensioner because they're a pensioner, but they get that $40 subsidy winter energy thing. Well, that could go to the council instead. You know, so there's ways of sort of paying it back as well. So I think we need to look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rusty. Rowena Wood, the Advanced Party. Go for it.
Right, well, I think it's undeniable that warm, damp-free housing is a huge contributor to all sort of positive outcomes, good health, the whole thing. When I read this question, the first thing that came up for me was really about the implementation of this and who we're going to be lending this money to, these loans. My fear was that it will be the working classes once again that shoulder the weight of all of this. So while it may sound, oh, let's give them so they can have energy, these loans, you know, really, what financial burden are we placing on people that clearly can't afford it? So, and I tell you what I thought about was when in the UK, when they started to bring out water meters and tariffs on water usage, the first people they hit were poor people in council flats, and it just gave them another bill and shoved them a little bit deeper into poverty. So I want to just make sure that if we're going to implement these things, that it's done with a protective aspect to it as well, so that the poor are not straddled with more debt. Does that make sense? That was my thinking around it.
Thanks, Rowena. Lucky last, Dan Thurston Crow from the Top Party.
Lucky old me. Again, way too much to pack into 2 minutes. This is totally with Elliot. The UK has a completely different energy mix, different set of dynamics to Aotearoa. It's not necessarily that useful to go that far and look at solutions that are applied outside of our context. One thing Top would agree with is go local government for actually doing its local thing, and yeah, we would absolutely support that, and don't necessarily see that the government has a role at that level. We do have a level. Our responsibility again is to set the environment where good constructive behaviors are incentivized and encouraged, and others are discouraged. You know, when we talk about natural gas in homes, it's less than 3% of our natural gas consumption, 0.3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's not where to go. We have a climate change commission. It has expertise. It's telling us where we need to look and what we need to focus on, which is primarily the low-hanging fruit of transportation emissions and process heat. So Top, among the incentives that we have is incentives and tax write-offs on greening up Kiwi houses, improving insulation, improving energy efficiency, but really looking at the true cost of change and the ultimate outlook for our emissions by taking the actions that we have. You know, converting appliances is a massive cost. As Rowena said, we don't want to put the burden on, you know, unfairly on people who can least afford it. So I'm muted, I think.
Annika, you're muted now.
Yeah. I got muted too. Okay, so that wraps up our 6 questions. And we do, what's the time? We do have enough time to go to the floor. So I'm going to go back to Oz and he's going to pick a question. We might not be able to get through all of them, but I guess, are we going to go for the ones with the biggest likes? So if we can maybe take like 30 seconds and everyone like whatever question they want, then we can do that.
Awesome. That's a good moment then to mihi to the 6 people here tonight. And you've done really well. It is different talking through a screen. Yes, the questions were a little bit hard. That's good. That's what they're meant to be, because you're lucky you didn't have to deal with people like myself who are happy heckling away if we're in a real life scenario. And no rotten eggs or tomatoes being chucked at you or water pistols, etc. So we also saved a lot of carbon emissions by doing this online, but not all driving to a venue. So let's get to these questions, and if you guys are a bit quicker in your responses, not go to the full 2 minutes, then we can hopefully get to them all. So feel free to you know, get to the point if that's all right. Well, there's one with 9 likes. Let's go to that one first. Not sure who sent it, an anonymous attendee. So, what are the panel's thoughts on supporting immigration from countries suffering the most extreme effects of climate change? The Philippines, Pacific Islands, West Africa, etc. So, Elliot, you alluded to this earlier with a placard you mentioned from the school climate strike and genocide in the Pacific. That's what climate change is. What's your thoughts on supporting climate refugees essentially coming into Aotearoa? Elliot, let's start with you.
Totally. Yeah, thanks. I think it's so incredibly important to support climate refugees as much as possible. You know, like these are people who have had their lives and their livelihoods stripped from them. So it's so important that we welcome them with compassion, as it's a incredibly difficult and horrific time for them. It's not obviously the preferred, you know, obviously it would be better for them to, you know, stay in the countries that they love, that they, you know, that they really enjoy being in. But when that's no longer an option for them, it's important that we welcome them with compassion, especially as a country with high per capita emissions.
Thank you, Elliot. Dan, is that something you care about? Is that an important kaupapa for you and your party?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been long-term supporters of improving our record on refugee intake. The last time we campaigned on doubling the number of refugees we take in, we don't think that we're doing our job as good global citizens as regards refugees. You know, realistically, I think we're really talking about the Kiwi way, about manaakitanga. And being good corporate citizens. What are we going to do? Stand around and watch people perish? I don't think we have any choice.
Thank you, Dan. Rowena, there's islands in the Pacific going under due to sea level rise. Would you guys be welcoming people fleeing from those kind of places into Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Oh, I think we definitely need to look at that. And if the situation ever arises, then we need to be having some discussion about that and being humanitarian in our response to our brothers and sisters from overseas that are facing these types of awful situations. Yeah. I mean, I think our party's has recently written a policy on immigration, and it's a huge area, you know, in and of itself. But yeah, I can see no objection to helping out fellow citizens in crisis. I don't think most folk would object to that, really.
Thank you, Rowena. Rusty Kane, what's your thoughts on this issue?
Oh, well, I agree, but we also need to be in collaboration with the other countries like Australia, France, maybe the USA, that all got an interest in the islands. We all need to do our part. It's not just us, because it's got to be, we're a small nation, but we need to collaborate with all these other nations as well. And yes, we need to do that.
Thank you, Rusty. Kath Lauderdale, where does social credit stand on this issue?
Social credit has a reasonably low immigration threshold, but I think in terms of refugees, I've lived in the islands. I think they would rather be supported to adapt there. But in the case they can't, rather than have economic refugees from more sort of privileged places, I think, and I am 5th on the party list, so I will actually have quite a lot of say. Okay, thanks.
Glenn, you're not 5th on the party list, you're a bit further down the chain. We as Labour at in terms of supporting, particularly Pacifica whānau, who are dealing with the effects of climate change right now?
I guess for me, I'll answer this question as a citizen of Aotearoa more than as the Labour candidate. First and foremost, as has been mentioned, we must do all we can to ensure that tangata whenua of the islands around the Pacific get to stay on their whenua, get to bury their dead and to honour their dead who are buried on their whenua for generations to come. And that is a challenge, I know, as a small nation. What can we do? But we can do something in terms of the conversation tonight around our climate. So for me, first and foremost, it would be, how do we ensure that we protect places like Kiribati who are already experiencing the waters lapping up on their shores and lapping up on their whenua in terms of the serious concern that is. So that's my first and foremost. And secondly, yes, as a Pacific nation, and I don't want to call us guardians, but we have a role to play to our Pacific brothers and sisters, and we as a nation have privilege and have space, and for centuries now have been welcoming others onto this land So I would hope that as a nation, as a government, I would hope that as the Labour Party, we would be open to those who are climate refugees.
Thanks everyone for your answers. There appears to be some consensus around this. So thanks for the person who asked the question, and I'll pass it to you, Annika, for another question from the audience.
Right, yeah, I think the one that is, we've got 9 likes on Kevin Rolfe's question, which is why the date 2050? That is not in compliance with the Paris Agreement, which requires global peaking of greenhouse, and this is a quote, global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. There's a little link there where you can see this, this person's submission to the Climate Change Response Amendment Bill. And in summary, he says 2050 is too late. So candidates, let's go to Kath Lauderdale to start with.
Yep, so I agree, absolutely, it's too late. And there is very little reason other than lack of will in government and corporate control for us to not do it pretty, you know, within a few years. So that's I agree. Thank you.
Cool, and we'll go Rowena Wood. Your thoughts? Oh, don't forget to unmute.
There we go. No, so I'll echo what Kath has just said, really. Yeah, I think we can do better. And I think we can sort this out sooner. And I think we'll find if we work together and get the right people around the table, actually, this isn't that. We can do this. Yeah, it's doable. Yeah.
Great, and we'll go to Dan Thurston Crowe.
Yeah, I absolutely believe 2050 is too late. I also am engaged in a lot of conversations in which I see either not just a lack of will, but actually an acknowledgement of what it's going to take, the honesty and the expertise to even reach 2050. You know, and in all honesty, pretty much everyone I've talked to with any scientific knowledge of this, their response to me is, we're fucked. And the best we can do is agitate and keep having these conversations and keep trying to bring people together. And I think you can even see in a forum like this, there's not yet enough consensus on what's going wrong, where it's going wrong, where the solution lies. So people, we've got to get our act together, but we're only going to do it by coming together, listening to expertise, and actually accepting some hard truths and getting to work on unfucking the mess that we've got ourselves into.
Love your work. Sorry, my cat Ollie's decided to join us all, so just excuse him, no manners. Let's go Rusty Kane.
Yeah, I think the figure's just plucked out of the air, and they've just done it on a sort of consensus to sort of try and please everybody. If we could do that earlier, good, but I just can't see it happening. It's kind of pie in the sky stuff. It's not, to me, it's just not real. So I just think, you know, if they're going to get serious on it, of course they could do it earlier, but I don't think they are. And I don't think a lot of people are. They just don't believe it. It's a nonsense to a lot of people. And well, it's an attitude change, really, and that starts with us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Elliot Blythe from the Greens Party, go for it.
Kia ora, yeah, I completely agree. 2050 is too late. The number is not picked out of the sky. That's the net zero by 2050 is from the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which is to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. We need to globally reach net zero by 2050. And the other really important part of that I think is often overlooked is that we need to, part of that report is that we need to halve our emissions by 2030. So we've got just 10 years to half those emissions, which is why it's so important that we have the Greens in government so that we can actually make that happen. So bringing that year forward is something that we campaigned on with the strike, the school strike for climate, and the reason being, if this is the global bare minimum, New Zealand has an obligation to surpass that, to be a world leader. But I think it's also worth acknowledging the monumental shifts and just how much it's going to take to reach this goal. It's something that we absolutely can do, but it is going to touch everything, every part of our lives. Kia ora.
Great answer. And lucky last, Glenn Bennett, Labour Party. Go for it.
In conclusion, so I mean, who doesn't like a nice round number like 2050? No, that's actually not the reason. I think, or I know that 2050 is an aspiration, or as a time in history. But I also think obviously it's a political number. Let's be quite honest about that, as a political number. But I also think it's a number that we put in place so that, because for many of us who are on this Zoom call tonight, you are early adopters, you are leaders, you are in around climate, you are activists, you are people who are at the forefront of climate change. And I think often there are people who are far further behind, who are lagging behind, who, if we said 2025, if we said 2030, if we said 2035, it could be like just head explosion moment. So I'm hoping, and I guess this is not a Labour Party policy, this is a Glenn Bennett aspirational hoping. This is the being innovative, that we say this, but then as we go over the next several days, weeks, months and years, that people are feeling more understanding that climate change is a real issue, is a real thing we have to deal with, and they will come to see that 2050 is just far too far away. I want us in the next term of office to have some key measures and changes that actually show we're making progress. For example, the Taranaki 2050 roadmap is wonderful. It's got these beautiful images and ideas and concepts, but I really want us to get some wins in the first 3 years of the next government in terms of actioning some of those things that will help people to see that we can make change, and we will make change. And like Elliot said, that we will be the world leaders who bring about change within this climate crisis.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, it's not often we all agree in a political candidate event, but it's safe to say I think we all agree that 2050 is a little too late.
There's a couple of people missing, just saying.
Oh, who did I miss?
No, missing from the debate. Don't worry.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that could have changed things. Right.
Is it possible to leave the meeting, because I want to go and have some tea?
If you want to, you're welcome to leave to go and have some tea.
Yeah.
I think we've got one more question, or is we going to do one more?
Yeah, let's say, because we've got a few minutes.
One more question, team. Everyone hang in there. We're nearly there. This is some juicy stuff, but stay awake. Go run and get a coffee if you need to.
Cool, I'll grab this last question if it's all right. And there's some beautiful other questions there. I really like the question around marine reserves. There's some really great thinking there, removing car parks in the CBD to provide safe storage for e-bikes, etc. So some really good stuff that we should really be responding to. But let's grab the meaty one there around hydrogen. And obviously hydrogen's been, some are really supportive as a solution for climate change. Many of us in the climate movement are not supportive at all. But there's a good question from Nathan Hills in the chat. In Taranaki, hydrogen power is talked about as a big ticket item, particularly for heavy transportation. It would be great to hear evidence from each party for or against hydrogen power. So quite a big question. Yeah, I agree. 2 minutes is tough on that one, but Rusty wants to start us off. Go, Rusty, then you can have your cup of tea.
Yeah, no, I'm for it. I think that we need to investigate that and see how far we can take it. But like I said before, it's got to be backed up. Government's got to back up all of these things that are coming forward, because if it doesn't have the support and the infrastructure to support these things, they're just going to be dead. They're not going to go anywhere, and that's the problem we're really having. So is that, I hope that answers the question, or the candidate's question. It's a good question too, and I just hope some more people actually agree with me, but yeah, I'll find out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Enjoy your dinner. Glenn Bennett, Megan Watts has been very vocal on hydrogen as a solution here in Taranaki for New Zealand. You know, many of us are not. So where do you stand, Glenn?
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. So a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Kapuni and the balance plant with Hiranga Energy, who obviously are the key leaders at the moment around hydrogen. Around heavy vehicles and some of that plant work, I'm conflicted at the moment and still trying to find my personal voice within this. I don't see hydrogen as obviously the silver bullet that Megan Woods is throwing a lot of weight at. I support its development. I was really surprised, and I guess happily surprised, cautious my words, around investing in wind farms down there in South Taranaki, and already talking with farmers right near the plant around putting up large wind farms in terms of green hydrogen. So I know, yeah, I think it has a place to play at this time. I don't know what its future is, but at this time, I think it can be part of a transition fuel.
Thank you, Glenn. And just to explain some of the issues for us in the climate movement around how it's produced, how the hydrogen is actually produced, and this distinction between blue, green, and grey, or black or purple hydrogen, etc. So, and whether it's made from some hydrogen is made from fossil fuel-based energy to turn into hydrogen. Dan, have you guys got thoughts around hydrogen within TOP?
Yeah, again, you know, like I just have to reinforce that TOP's about evidence and expertise. And it's not my area. I have the benefit of being able to talk to a number of local people who are in the industry and have got really interesting insights. So, you know, one of the things I'm aware of is, and this is my understanding of the issue, that the government commissioned a paper by Concept Consulting, which had a specific kind of expertise in the industry. That report was somewhat unfavorable. I believe it's accessible. I have seen it. It's way beyond my capacity to absorb. Subsequent to that, I believe a study was commissioned through KPMG or PwC, which was much more favorable, however, wasn't actually conducted by people with expertise within the industry. So, you know, I guess we come back to the question of whether what the role of government is in this, and whether government is sufficiently bound to expertise, like what the IP and Interim Climate Change Commission is saying, and also. You know, like I do know as well that these issues are really complex. For example, the mechanisms by which we deliver natural gas to homes is actually the infrastructure that we can use to deliver hydrogen. So you know, all I'm saying really is ultimately this is I don't have the. I would like to see government deferring to expertise, building case studies around what will lead us to a carbon-free 2050, and implementing those things for which there is a genuine scientific and expert case.
Thank you, Dan. Rowena, hydrogen for heavy transportation, is this something that you and your party would support?
Again, it's a very specialised area, but what I can say is that I know that Advance NZ is keen to support all different types and look into different types of renewable clean energy sources. And they have got an interest in run off the river, hydro and wave technology. They mention it in their agriculture policy. It is an area that we do need to be looking in. Yeah. And that, again, that is easily done by getting the right people around the table, getting rid of all the agendas and all of the ties and the other kind of more corrupt perhaps or agenderized elements to this, and just getting the people around the table that care about this stuff, that have looked into it, done their due diligence, we can work out the problem of clean energy.
Thank you, Rowena. Kath from Social Credit, hydrogen. What's your
So
thoughts?
personally, I'm not at all in any. I think we're creating a market for something for which there is no demand, which is very typical of industries. There's no demand for it. They're going to have to create both the supply and the demand to do it. And why would you do that when we have sufficient power in the country? Anyway, and each household can actually, with the use of right simple technology, produce enough energy for itself. Again, I just think it's just more techie, I feel like I'm in Overthinkers Anonymous with this lot, you know. Try and keep it simple, try and keep it safe, use proven technologies. I don't think it's safe. Thanks.
Thanks, Kath. Elliot, you're the youngest in this crowd. It's your future. It feels appropriate that you have the last word from the candidates here tonight on hydrogen. Up to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So hydrogen will play a very important mix in our energy system in the future for one reason, and that is storage. So the big issue that we have with energy in our country and moving to 100% renewable energy is that the sun only shines in the day and the wind only blows whenever it wants to blow. And so when we want to use that
Elliot, I've got to correct you here. The wind always blows in Taranaki.
Sorry, yeah, I'm actually talking from Wellington as well, so maybe I shouldn't be speaking that. But so the issue with renewables is that there's downtime where we need to use the power, but it's not being generated. So storing that electricity is incredibly important. And I think that this will come through in a lot of different ways, including grid level battery storage, electric vehicle to grid systems. But hydrogen is also really important because you can turn that excess renewable energy that we're generating when there's no demand into hydrogen that we can use at a later date. I think that there's some role for it in some long distance trucking, but mostly just in the kind of energy storage side of things. It is like, I see where you're coming from, Kath, that it is creating the supply and the demand. But the reality is that that demand is there and it's growing. And as we will need to almost double our energy generation capacity and the next, as our population grows and as our energy needs grow as well. And as we look to decarbonize that, we need to make sure that we're generating more electricity, but we also have more storage capacity. So that'll come from grid level batteries, vehicle to grid, hydrogen, as well as potentially some pumped storage projects like the Labour announcement recently. Yeah, I am passionate about this. Please ask me more questions about hydrogen.
Cool. If you want to geek out with Elliot on hydrogen, feel free to hit him up. That was the last Q&A question. And Annika, over to you on how this poll will go.
Yeah, so we have a poll for everybody who is still hanging in there with us about who gave the best answer to these climate questions. Hopefully that has come up on your screen and you can obviously pick one. I'm
going to be gutted if Vernon wins.
Yeah, let's please don't vote for him because he wasn't here. Good point, Dan.
And just to be clear, hosts and panelists cannot vote. All of you candidates who are running to vote for yourself, you can't.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. So everybody get out there, put your vote in. And I just want to say, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We've had some really in-depth discussions and thanks to the candidates. They were some really tough questions too. And you handled them like pros. We've got to test these politicians, so thank you all for coming out.
And thanks to Climate Justice Taranaki and to the Climate Consciousness Taranaki. Barbara, I always forget how many, there's lots of C's in your group, but thank you for hosting us. Yeah, it's always challenging and confronting, and I think I always go away with more questions and more for me to discover and learn. So kia ora for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Super important discussion. Thank you so much for including us.
Thank you. Here's the results. Annika, do you want to talk us through those?
Yeah, right. So it looks like Glenn Bennett is the winner on 53%. At second, I guess we'll do first, second, and third, even though I'm a big, there's always winners and losers. But, if you're second and third, you're not a loser, so that's great. So Glenn Bennett's the winner. We've got Elliot Blythe on 47% and Dan Thurston Crow on 13%. And then we've got Kath coming in on 7. And yeah. So well done to Glenn. People love your answers. I'm sure people loved everybody's answers here. Well, probably didn't love all of them, but there was a mixture. And yeah, over to you, Oz.
Kia ora tātou. Just finishing our night off, I want to specifically mihi to you, Stuart, and to Barbara. Stuart's organised pretty much all of this with Barbara's support, doing the tech stuff, getting you guys participating, your candidates being that you're here tonight, that you have questions in front of you. And so Stuart and Barbara, thank you so much for putting your volunteer time into this democratic process. This was hosted by Climate Justice Taranaki and Climate Change and Consciousness. Annika and I hosted for you. I just want to say, be active in your community. Voting is one thing. Yeah, we can all go do that. But most importantly, let's be active together on climate change, on climate justice. If you want to join our group, Climate Justice Taranaki, reach out, get involved in being active on the ground in Taranaki. We'd love to hear from you, love to connect, and let's make climate change a really important issue in this election. And yeah, that's it from us, 9:02. I think I might just finish with a little karakia and call it a day. Is that all right? Right,
totally. Can I just add one thing that actually we can all do our bit for climate change, and it's our individual behaviours and the little things that we do as individuals that will change this world. So just put that out there to everyone.
Someone in the chat said, think global, act local.